Hi, we're the Cli-Mates, a student-based group dedicated to help finding a way to combat climate change. When we initially started researching our project, we found that in recent years, carbon dioxide emissions as well as greenhouse gas emissions have been on an all-time high in places like New York State as well as across our nation. Therefore, we decided to incorporate low-carbon diets into our community in hopes of reducing the carbon emissions that our community produces. Low-carbon diets are organic, sustainable, and locally sourced foods that are incorporated into one's diet. This would in turn, we hope, allow carbon emissions to decrease in our area. Because of the problem of the high carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, we posed this solution and hypothesized that low-carbon diets would help decrease the amount of carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions in our area.
Within our experiment, we went through 4 main methodologies in order to see if our hypothesis was true. This includes creating a carbon calculator, comparing the carbon emissions of a low-carbon diet versus the carbon emissions of our school meal plan. Third, we compared the carbon emissions of various common diets in America. And fourth, we compared the carbon emissions of the average teen diet versus that of low-carbon diets. So firstly, we were able to code a calculator. Using online as a resource, we found from certain databases the basic carbon emissions of certain basic foods that Americans eat on a daily basis. Then we used the Python program. Within the Python program, we made sure that the calculator was able to input certain basic meals that any user could include in the calculator. Then we made sure using the program that the calculator was able to output the emissions of these consequential foods. Second, we compared the emissions of our school lunch to a low-carbon meal plan. Using our school's database, we found our school's monthly meal plan, and we made our own meal plan of a low-carbon diet. Then we compared the carbon emissions of both to see which one was more efficient. Third, we were able to compare the emissions of various diets. So we were able to accumulate our own equation that helped us find carbon emissions. So using this equation, we were able to compare the carbon emissions of main diets, including vegan, vegetarian, average American, and meat lover diets. And for our last form methodology, we were able to actually go through these meal plans on our own. So first, we were able to track the average meal plan of our average diet that we eat on a 2-week basis. Then we all followed our own low-carbon diet meal plan for 2 weeks and compared the carbon emissions of 2.
The carbon calculator section of this experiment helped to demonstrate the CO2 emissions of a certain type of food group that was inputted into the program in kilograms per emission. For example, if an animal byproduct food, such as beef, was inputted into the program, then the output showed there was often a much greater amount of CO2 emitted than if the input was a plant-based food, such as peas and other fruits and vegetables. The results in the following slide then showed carbon emission that came from a week's worth of an average high school lunch in comparison to a week's worth of low-carbon substitutes curated by the group members. Again, as the bar graph shows, on a daily average, the regular school lunch emitted far more carbon emissions in comparison to the low-carbon substitutes. The calculations for these emissions were calculated using the calculator shown on the prior slide. In the next slide, the results for the total greenhouse gas emissions, calculated using the rough equation on the right side of the graph, demonstrates the differences in emissions between common American type diets. As the graph demonstrates, the diets that were plant-based, such as vegan and vegetarian diets, often had a significantly lower amount of greenhouse gas emissions in comparison to diets that relied on animal-based products, such as the average American diet and the meat lover diet. The final results slide show the differences between an average teen diet in comparison to an average low-carbon meal plan over the span of 2 weeks. Again, using the equation mentioned in the previous slide, the results demonstrated an overall greater amount of carbon emissions from a regular diet, whilst the low-carbon plant diet had less carbon emissions.
So after going through this research, we saw the effects that it had on our hypothesis. So from the carbon calculator, we were able to see that high-fat meat, such as beef, had the highest amount of greenhouse gas emissions. However, vegetables such as peas have the lowest amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and these vegetables are what are usually included in a low-carbon diet. When we compared our school diet to a low-carbon diet, we saw that low-carbon foods overall have significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions than our normal school lunch. When comparing various diets using our own equation, we were able to see that plant-based and vegan foods, which are included in low-carbon diets, have lower carbon emissions. when following our own diets, which is the average teen diet, and comparing them to when we followed low carbon diets, we were able to see that a low carbon meal plan had lower carbon emissions than what we had normally eat on a day-to-day basis. When we were going through our experiment, we also encountered a few limitations. One, we had limited time. So when we were following the meal plans on our own, including the average meal plan as well as a low carbon diet meal plan, we had a short and limited amount of time to actually obtain these results. This means that we accumulated less data than we would have liked. We also had limited resources, so we were only able to access databases that could be found online when we were forming our own carbon equation of emissions, and we were also calculating carbon emissions that we needed for our calculator. And finally, with our calculator, we had a limitation. We did not include the carbon emissions that come from transporting food across the country into our calculator, as this would include too many factors within our experiment.
Our original hypothesis stated that low-carbon diets will beneficially affect the state of our atmosphere by reducing the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted by the foods that we eat, therefore positively affecting overall carbon footprint. Our results show that plant-based foods have beneficial effects on lowering our carbon footprints, and low-carbon diets have a lower carbon emission in comparison to other diets, including the average high school meal plan and other common diets used in America. Therefore, our hypothesis was ultimately supported.
Some future applications we hope to have with this study is to conduct it again with a larger sample size so we can see how it affects others in our area. Secondly, we hope to study how agriculture can affect the carbon footprint. Thirdly, we hope to see how other daily human activities can contribute to the carbon footprint.